Hello friends, my name is AJ and welcome to the fourth video of Carolina Analytics and Data Science's Introduction to Python for Data Science series. In the last video, we analyzed numerical data types as well as the arithmetic that you can do with them. In this video, we're going to be going in depth onto strings, working with text in Python. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright everyone, so just like before, I am inside of a new Jupyter notebook and I have 4 cells which are separated for the different topics that we're going to be talking in this video. So the first thing that we're going to recall is creating strings or variables that store text inside of them. And so what I can do is I'm going to name this variable my string, and again we're going to follow the same format, which is name equals value. We've been talking about this in previous videos for creating variables, where we have the value on the right side that we're storing, and then the name for the variable for us to access it later on the left-hand side. So in order to create strings, let's say I want to put the text hello world inside of my variable. If you recall that in order to actually create a string or store text, you need to surround your string with quotation marks, just like this. So you can either use single quotation marks just like that, or you can use double quotation marks. Again, I generally by habit use double quotation marks. However, you can use either one and they work perfectly well. And so you surround text using these quotation marks, and that's what allows Python to know that you're actually talking about text and nothing else. And as you can see, if I use the print statement on the my string variable, you'll see that it prints out the text. It outputs the text hello world. And we can also verify using the type function the type of the variable. So I can say my string, and you can see that the variable type is str, or shorthand for a string. All right. So those are, that is again a little bit of a review on strings themselves and creating strings. Now there's one other thing that we can actually add. So we have the print and we have the type functions, but in addition we can now add a new one that is very good for string variables. And that one is called the length function. And for this we can just type in len, and you can see when I type it in, the text changes to green. And then I can have open and close parentheses and put in my string just like this. And what length is going to do is length is actually going to return how long our string is, or how many characters are in our string. And if I run this, you can see here that it prints out 13. There are 13 characters in my string. And we can count this. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, spaces do count, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So there are 13 characters inside of our string. So this is a new function. So we use the length function to count the number of characters in a string, just like that. All right, so now we've talked about creating a string variable. This is kind of building off of what we did in the second video. And we also talked about this new function that allows us to see how many characters are actually inside of our string. And now we're going to get to the next concept, which is known as concatenation. This is a rather fancy word for essentially taking strings and connecting them together. So let's say I have 2 words. So I'm going to say word 1, and I'm going to say hello, that this is hello. And remember, we have to separate our word we have to surround our word rather, using quotation marks. And I will now create a second variable called word2, sorry, and this will say world. So I have hello and world. But what if I want to create a full sentence out of this? I want to connect these 2 words together, and I'll actually make world lowercase. Well, what we can do is we can actually use the addition operator. The addition operator from the numerical variable in the last video. We can use addition to add these 2 words together. And so what I can do is I can call this sample sentence, and I can say this is equal to word 1 plus word 2. And now if I were to print out sample sentence, you can see that it prints out hello world. you take the first word, hello, and it adds to it the second word, which is world. Now you can see in this case there's no space here, so we can actually add a space right here where we had word 1 and word 2. In between, we can add another string that is just simply a space. So you can see what we're doing here is we're taking one string, which is hello, then we're adding to it a space, a single space character, and then we're going to add the second word, which is world. If I were to rerun this cell, you can now see that it prints out hello space world. This is what is known as concatenation, adding strings together. And I can also add another character at the end of this, which is a exclamation point. And if I were to run this again, you can see that it prints out hello world with an exclamation point. It's simply taking all of these strings and combining them together, adding one directly onto the end of the other, and saving that as a new variable. Now this is great because we can take many different strings and add them together. So for example, let's say that you are storing a variable for your first name and the last name of people. So let's say even if you're working with a table, you have one column that has first names, second column with last names. If you want to get the full name of the person, you can simply take the first name and add it, or take the first name and add to it the second name or the last name. And you can separate those with a space. And that is why concatenation is very, very useful. Now, in addition, you might be wondering, well, I can add strings together, but what if I want to take a string and add an integer to it? So let's say I have a sentence here, so I'll say sentence 1, and this is equal to my age is, just like that, and I'll add a space in here, right? But what if I want to add a number to this? So let's say that my age is, I'll just do a random number like 50, right? So I can say print, or I guess I'll say sentence 2. And sentence 2 will be equal to sentence 1 plus 50, which is the age I want to put in here. And now if I were to print out sentence 2, you'll notice that it gives me an error. Now we can see what this error says. It says we can only concatenate string, not int, to string. What this is essentially saying is that we can only take two strings and add them together. So for example here, word 1 was a string. This space is a string because there are two quotation marks around it. Here, word 2 is a string, and this exclamation point is a string. But here, this sentence 1, this is actually a string, but then here we are adding an integer to it. So in this case, you cannot add an integer to a string. The only way that we can do that is if we converted this number to a string. So for example, if I surrounded this with quotation marks, then if I were to print this out, then you can see that it says my age is 50. However, let's say that I have a variable that stores my age. Let's say my age is 50 here. This is a numerical variable. And if I were to add age to this, you can see that it gives me the same error because this is an integer. You cannot add an integer to a string. So you might think, well, I can just put, quotations around this and then run it. But you'll see that when you do this, now Python no longer thinks of age as a variable. It thinks of age as a string, and it's literally going to add the name of the variable to this. My age is age, which we cannot have. So the way that we convert variables such as integers or floats to a string is by using yet another function, and this one is called str. str. And you can see that as I type it, it turns green because it is a built-in function into Python. And I can add open and close parentheses, just like how we use print, type, and length. And then in between the parentheses, the input for this function is going to be our age. So what this is doing is it's taking my age, which is a numerical variable, and converting this to a string. Now that we've converted it to a string, we can now add it to our original string because now they're both of the same type. And you can see if I run this, now we have my age is 50. We were able to take an integer and add it to a string or concatenate the two by using this string function. So this is also something that is very, very useful. Let's say you're running some sort of calculation and you are making a sentence and including your answer in there. Well, in order for you to add numbers that you actually compute into sentences or into strings, you need to convert it to a string first. So that is very, very useful, especially in the world of data science, where you need to take numbers and possibly explain them or add them to some sort of story. And so by concatenating using the string function, it'll allow us to add numbers directly into our strings. So that is the entire concept of concatenation. Again, fancy word, but it's just taking strings, adding them together, or taking strings and other things, such as in this case a number, converting it to a string, and then adding it together. All right, everyone, so now we're going to be talking about the next main concept with strings. And this is known as indexing, also, or just the index. It's a pretty fancy term, but essentially what the index is referring to is it is the position of characters within the overall string. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to take a string, so I'm going to actually take hello world up here. I'm just going to copy this. I'm just going to paste it right here, and I'm going to make this in a comment. Okay, so now I have a second comment. Well, here we have, again, using our length function, we can see that we have 13 characters. Now, all of these characters are in a specific order within our string, and they all have their own position. The capital H is the first character, then followed by the E, two L's, O, etc. Now, how do we know the specific location, or how can we find each character at its specific location? Well, the location that characters are found in a string is known as the character's index. All right. So you can see here that H is the first character. So you would automatically assume, well, this must be at index number 1 because it is the first character. However, not so fast. With indexing in Python and in many other programming languages, the first character of a string is actually at position 0. Okay, this is at index 0. I'm going to add some spaces here in between all these characters so that you can see a little bit easier. All right, the first character is at index 0. The second character is at index 1. The third, 2. The fourth, 3, etc. So you can see that this is the position of all of the. So this would be at position 10, position 11, and position 12. And I'll kind of add spaces here. There we go. So that is the position of all of the characters. So when we want to, let's say, get a specific letter out of, or a specific character out of our string, we need to figure out first what position it actually is in. So in this case, if I want to get the capital H out, well, I need to examine my string and then take the character out of index, or at index 0. And we can do this using the string and using square brackets. So for example here, sample sentence, if I were to just print out sample sentence, again, you can see that it prints out hello world. However, now, and I'm going to do this inside of a print statement, we can use square brackets with an index to get a specific character. All right, so for example, if I do sample sentence, just like that, and then I use square brackets, open and close, after the string. Now, very important, these are square brackets. Parentheses like this will not work. Neither will the curly braces. You need to use square brackets. Very important. So now if I put in an index in here, any index number, it will essentially give me the character at that index. So for example, if I want to get the first letter, well, I would put in 0 as the index, because again, remember, the first character is located at index 0 in a string. It doesn't start counting at 1, it starts counting at 0. So if I were to print this now, you could see that it gives me the capital H, or the first letter. If I want to get the E out of my string, well, that is in position 2, which is index 1, because remember, index starts at 0. So the second letter, even though it is the second letter, it's at index number 1. So if I change this to 1, you can now see that it prints out an E. And I can continue doing this for all of my letters. I can choose a random position, such as 8, and you'll see that it actually prints out a R. And actually, this printed out R because here I accidentally included a comma. The comma is not actually in my item here. So you can see here that the 8th position, right, is where R is located, or the 8 index is where R is located. Even though R is the 9th character in the string, it is in position 8 because we start counting at 0. That I am repeating that a lot because that is something that you have to kind of get your mind around, because this particular concept is relatively new. So now I can get single letters out of my string by using this indexing technique. But what if I want to get an entire word or a series of letters out of my string? And for this, we can use a range. So I can go here and I can put 0. And so now, when we want to do a range, we need to include the first letter as well, or the first position, the start position, as well as the ending position. So we have the start position, colon, end position. All right. So let's say I want to get the word hello out of here. Well, you would think that I start at 0 and then my final is at 4. So I could put 0 and I could put in 4. And if I run that, you can see that this is not what it gives. It gives me the first 4 letters rather than the first 5 letters. And that is because this range is not inclusive on the ending bound over here. Meaning that this goes from 0 to up to 4, but not including it. So it's only going to do these 4 letters. So if I want to get the entire word, I need to go to index 5. And if I run this, now it prints out the word hello, because it's going to take the characters 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, and up to 5, but not including 5. And so that would be all of these 5 letters over here. And so using indexing to get words out is also very useful, because knowing the positioning of characters in a string will come in handy a lot later, especially if you want to format. So for example, let's say you wanted to make hello italicized later on, then you need to know where hello is located. Or let's say you have a string and you want to, take the first 5 letters of it, or like let's say you're taking a country name and you need the first 3 letters to make some sort of abbreviation, then you would need to know the positioning. So 0, 1, and 2, and then take that out using the square bracket and colon technique over here, using a range. All right, and now that brings us to the last concept, which is known as escape characters. And escape characters is also another fancy term, but it essentially allows us to include certain things in our string that we might not usually be able to do. For example, let's say I want to create a string. So I'm going to say my string, and I'm going to name this again hello world. All right. But let's say I want to put a line break in here, meaning I want to separate hello and world, have this on line 1 and this on line 2. Well, if I do this, you can see, and if I try to print my string out, you'll see that it gives me an error. It gives me an error EOL, which stands for end of line while scanning string literal. So you can see here that we just, it's reading this. However, because there's no closing quotation mark, it thinks that this is a broken string, meaning that the string does not actually have an end. Now, if I were to add this back on the same line, you can see that it works. But the minute that I press enter, it thinks that this is, okay, this line is now complete, and now we go to the second line, and, it does not work. So we can use something known as an escape character, or a special character, that allows us to show or to tell Python that we want to make a line break. We don't need to do it physically with the enter key, but if we include a special character, then we can have it still show up as in a new line in our code. And to do this, we need to use the \n. This looks interesting, right? Because I have hello and then /n world. However, what Python does is it's scanning through this and then it sees the backslash. And so then the next character is going to determine something. So in this case, n refers to new line. So when Python's reading this, it's going to say, oh, there's a backslash, so the next character is going to tell me to do something. And in this case, it's n, so it's going to tell me to make a new line. You can see when I shift and enter, it now makes both of my lines, or it makes hello and world separated onto two different lines. Now I can change this to a t, backslash t. And you'll see here that it's going to go and it's going to say hello, oh, backslash, it's going to now want me to do something. And in this case, I put t, which refers to a tab. So if I were to run this, you can now see that my word, hello and world, is separated with an indent or with a tab. And that is very useful. Now, also another thing, let's say I want to have an actual quote, right? So let's say I want to say, that I said, and I'm going to say that I'm going to have myself say this quote. So let's say I want to say, so this is, there we go. I want to say, hello world. And this is from me, I'm saying this, right? Because now I'm including quotation marks inside of my string. And if I run this, you can see that Python does not like this because it's thinking that this right here is string number 1. Then the string is done. I have these random words, and then I have a second string right over here. And you can see what it's considering as a string based on the colors. The orange coloring is a string. And so it is saying that, you can't do this. Because again, in this case, because our outer quotation marks are double quotes, it's going to assume that this is what you're using to open and close a string. Now, if I were to use single quotes here instead, that's one way to solve the problem. So if I put single quotes, you can see now, if I were to print this, that it's going to print out exactly how I want with double quotes, all right? But let's say I have both of these. So I'm going to go back to double quotes, all right? So this is a double quote, and let's say that I'm saying AJ's dog. I don't have a dog, but let's say that my dog all of a sudden started speaking English and said, hello world, right? Now I'm using both a single quote and double quotes. So all of a sudden this is, and also this needs to have another quote here. There we go. So this would be very confusing for Python because no matter what you start and close with, right, it's going to be confused. So what we can do is we can actually use an escape character to solve our problem. By putting a backslash in between, or right in front of our quotation marks, Python now reads these as actual quotation marks and not opening and closing of string. Because this is another example of an escape character. Python is reading here, all right, it sees the first quotation mark, oh, there's a backslash. So now whatever is after that is going to tell Python to do something. And because now we have a quotation mark, it's not reading this as a quotation mark, meaning the opening and closing of a string, but it's reading it as an actual quotation mark in our text. So it's going to put a real quotation mark in our string, and then over here, it's also going to put a real quotation mark. So now if I run this, you can see that it preserves these quotation marks in my string. So escape characters are very, very useful, especially when we are trying to convey different either symbols or different stylistic choices, such as a tab or a new line inside of our string. And actually, in the description of this video, I will be providing a link to a longer list of escape characters. You can take a look and see all of the different options. There are many of them. The 3 here that I covered, which would be, and I'll write this in a comment, \n refers to new line. We have \t, which refers to tab, and \quote, which allows us to put a quote, so just quotation mark, inside of our text. These 3 are the most common escape characters that you might use, but there are many others as well. And so if you take a look at that, it might help if you're ever in a situation where you need to include either some sort of character or something which you might not be able to know how to do. Because if you were to do it, it would give an error in Python. All right, everyone, that is it for this video. If you liked the video, feel free to like and subscribe for more content. Make sure to follow CADS on Instagram, as well as join our Listerv for the most up-to-date information on the organization. Thanks for watching, and see you all in the next one.